Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and the rise of the modern search engine, by which, of course, we mean Google. As we said in the last lecture, by 1998, you can see it down here, there's 2.4 million websites, and it's going up exponentially. You can no longer hand compile lists that will be in indexes or directories. You need a way to search it. You need to search the internet to find what you want. Otherwise, there's no good human network computer interface, and the whole thing is like a jungle. And so a few search engines had come along there, but they were pretty bad. They didn't really get to what you wanted to get to. But as we'll see, in that year when we hit 2.4 million websites, that's the year that Google is born. One of the co-founders is, of course, Larry Page. Born and raised in Michigan, his parents were academics. His dad was a math teacher at the University of Michigan. And like a lot of the people that we talk about, from Steve Jobs to Alan Kay to Ada Lovelace even, he liked both the arts and technology. He was deeply into computers, but he went to music camp. He played saxophone. He studied composition. He went to this place called Interlochen in Michigan, which was one of the great music camps. And one of the things they did at Interlochen was they ranked each kid. It's almost like ranking a web page, right? But they would rank each kid, and how did they do it? They crowdsourced it, which meant that two people would play the same piece, and there'd be a few kids sitting in front of them, but they'd be facing in the other direction. They didn't know which of the two kids was playing. And then they would rate the kids, and it would be a process of elimination until finally you moved all the way up to the top in the rankings. When he was at the University of Michigan himself, where his parents went, Larry Page loved a class he took on human-computer interaction. He studied how you can design interfaces like, we saw at Xerox PARC and Apple, that are intuitive. In particular, he looked at an email client, something called Eudora back then. And he figured out how much longer did it take if you used a command and then something to try to do an action, or if you could just point and click. He said it took 0.9 more seconds to do it with a command than a point and click. And so he had it perform various tasks. And he said, quote, "I developed an intuition for how people will interact with the screen." He's rejected by MIT, but he gets accepted by Stanford. And in some ways, that's very lucky for him. MIT, as we've seen earlier in the course, was incredibly good at teaching and at academics and research, but they frowned upon people starting their own businesses. And so it wasn't quite like Stanford, which had a dean for many years named Frederick Terman, who very much encouraged people who went to Stanford, people who taught at Stanford, to get involved in the businesses of what became Silicon Valley. When he goes to his orientation in 1995 at Stanford, Larry Page meets Sergey Brin. That's, a bit like, Steve Jobs meeting Steve Wozniak, or Gordon Moore meeting Bob Noyce, or Hewlett meeting Packard, or James Watson meeting Francis Crick. They clicked. They became a team. Sergey had actually been born in Moscow. His father taught math at Moscow State. His mother worked for the big state oil and gas company as a researcher, but they were Jewish. And it sort of hampered their ability to get promoted much higher, lots of discrimination. And when they applied for an exit visa, both of them got fired from their job. It took another couple of years before they got the exit visa. That was in 1979. And young Sergey's 5 years old then. They end up in Maryland, where his father teaches math at the University of Maryland. His mother works at the Goddard Space Flight Center. And Sergey is able to breeze through high school in 3 years and breeze through the University of Maryland in 3 years. And just like Larry Page, he has the good luck to be rejected by MIT. So he goes to Stanford and they meet during this orientation and they totally bond. He says, they joke about it now. Like both of them say, I remember that the other one was really obnoxious, but they said, but all we did was we talked a mile a minute and we ignored everybody else. We found each other very obnoxious, but they have remained and are sort of totally bonded in the way their minds work and in the way they interact. They studied at a new building at Stanford that was called the William Gates Computer Science Building, because Bill Gates, by this point, Microsoft has totally taken off, and he's endowed computer buildings at Harvard, Stanford, University of Washington, and many other places, and a whole new generation becomes like Paul Allen and Bill Gates. They become bonded in computer labs, and that was certainly true of what were known as Larry and Sergey, as if it were all one word, sort of one word, and you can see it here with what's called camelback, where you capitalize the different words but smash them together. You've seen that like in Alta Vista and many different companies. You see how they do that. Everybody called them goofy smart, both of them, because they were indeed absolute geniuses in math and computer sciences, but totally goofy. And Page in particular loves this notion of human-computer interaction, and they have a group at Stanford that's dedicated to human-computer interaction, run by a wonderful Einstein-haired professor named Terry Winograd, who becomes the advisor for the two of them. So when Larry's looking around for a dissertation, he's thinking of doing self-driving cars, but he decides that he instead wants to try to rank the importance of pages on the World Wide Web. Partly because his parents were academics, and if you're academics and you publish a paper, the importance of that paper is often determined by how many people footnote it or cite it in their bibliography. And there's all sorts of programs that look at how many times did this research paper get cited or footnoted by somebody else, and that determines the importance of the paper. But the problem on the World Wide Web is the links, as we talked about when Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, they don't go both ways. So if I'm on a web page, I can look at all those hyperlinks and I know what they link out to, but I do not know what links are coming into the pages. So it's very hard to rank a page by seeing how many people cited it, but because you cannot look at the page and figure out how many people have linked into it. As Larry said, hypertext had a flaw. It didn't have bidirectional links, didn't have the two-way links that Ted Nelson, who had created a system called Xanadu and was a purist about hypertext, that's what he had wanted. But Tim Berners-Lee said, if we make people get permission and link both in for incoming links as well as doing outgoing links, then the web won't grow exponentially, as it was indeed growing. So basically, Larry and Sergey signs aboard for the ride, have to figure out a way to figure out how many things are linking to a particular page. And as I said, by the time they're really going at it in early 95, there's 100,000 websites with close to 1 billion possible links, all growing exponentially. And what you do is you use a web crawler. It's like a spider that crawls around the web. Larry Page had his start at Larry Page's own homepage. And what it would do is it would click on every one of the links on the homepage, go find out where that link went, and then put it into a huge database here of all the links that the web crawler had found. And then once you have that database, you can look at it all and you can look at it backwards to see not only where the link's going to, but how many links do you have incoming to each page. And they called it backrub, using the camel case I talked about, because it went back and figured out what links back to each page. Backrub was there not to do a search engine. It was simply there to say how important? How much of an impact does each web page have? And they started using up all the server space in Stanford in order to do it, but they had no thought of building a search engine. And then it occurs to them that once you have all this data in a database, and once you're figuring out the importance of each page, you can use that information to drive a search engine so that you just search for something and it looks at that whole database of links and it looks at which are the most important of them, which is why the other search engines really suck, because they would tell you, oh yeah, this word was found on that web page, but it didn't rank them by the importance of each page. And they called it PageRank because, of course, it ranked each page. But as Larry said, it's also a bit of vanity. He named it PageRank, a little bit after himself. And it becomes an iterative process because you're figuring out how many links go to the page. Let's say that you have a page that's the Tulane University homepage. You'll look at how many links go into it and you say, okay, Tulane's more important than Georgia Tech or LSU and the number of links coming in. But then you can do something that's complex but iterative, which is not only see how many links that are coming in, but how many links are coming in from important pages. And you can say a link from Justin Hall's, dorm room web page is not nearly as important as a link that comes from the New York Times or the Washington Post. And you rank each page, and then it becomes the sort of mathematics you need to do it iteratively. That if you figure out the importance of each page, it tells you, okay, links from that page become more important, and you get to continually upgrade the rankings of each of the pages. And as they wrote in their sort of paper they did for their professors, and actually published it with one of their professors, says the page has a high rank if the sum of the ranks of its backlinks is high. This covers both the case when a page has many backlinks and when a page has a few, in other words, not very many, but they have highly ranked backlinks. There were many other search engines, as I said, and they didn't do stuff like that. They just, if you had university on it, it would just go and see just randomly what web pages used the word university, and it didn't really calculate which is more important, how many got the most links to it, all that sort of thing. And there was Alta Vista and Magellan and Ask Jeeves and Hotbot, and they just totally suck, so people didn't use them much. But when Larry and Sergey create PageRank, they decide to test it out against the other search engine, and they use the word university. They type it in, Alta Vista, Magellan. They just randomly, they give you some universities, they give you some web page that has the name university in it or the word university in it. But when Larry and Sergey did it, it ranked it, the top hits were Harvard University, Yale University, Princeton, and Stanford, and the University of Michigan, which made Larry Page happy. And he realized that they were creating a real search engine, not just some random list of things that contained a particular word that you put in the search bar. They decide, because it's just doing millions and billions and then trillions of things, to name their company that they were going to found and their search engine, instead of PageRank, which you can't really keep calling it that, they decided to name it Google after the number. That's a huge number. Some of you know exactly what it is, maybe one with to the 100th or something, and it's spelled Googel. But when they searched to see if the name was available, they misspelled it. They spelled it Google. And that name was available. The other one, the correct spelling, wasn't. So you ended up with the name Google spelled a bit incorrectly. They kept improving it. And what they would do is they would see if somebody searched for something And then they didn't find it in the top 5 or 6 things on the page. They had to scroll down and go to the next page. They'd realize, well, we got to fix it. That search wasn't very useful. They learned how to use synonyms. For, in other words, that there's a synonym if you're looking for dogs, for example. Well, puppies are kind of the same thing. And if you're looking for something that's really hot, the word boiling might be the same thing. But then you had to fix it. So somebody might search for something that's boiling and really hot, and they might also, search for puppies. But if they type in the word hot dogs, they're not looking for boiling puppies. They're looking for hot dogs, something you can eat. All these things are pretty complicated, but if you have an iterative process that almost learns from itself, then you're going to keep improving that search engine. And eventually, do it as their dissertation, but people in Silicon Valley have also invented, as I've said, this notion of venture capital. So a guy named Andy Bechtolsheim, one of the early venture capitalists, he had also been a great entrepreneur and engineer. He drives to see them in his car, and he says to them, I don't want your pitch. Just let me borrow your computer. I want to type in and see how well it works. He types in a bunch of things, Bill Clinton, and at other places it might get you to the Bill Clinton joke page. But in this new search engine, Google, it got you right to the whitehouse.gov was the first thing. Andy Bechtolsheim says, this is great. Here's a check. He goes to his car, a convertible, takes it out of the glove compartment, takes a checkbook and says, here's a check for $100,000. I want to be your first angel investor, figure out what percentage of the company we'll have. And they said, they evaluated the company. He said, no, it's too cheap, the way you're valuing the company. And he got them to value it right. And they said, thanks for the check, but we don't even have a bank account yet. He said, go get a bank account, go cash the check, and go incorporate your company. You now have investors. They went to Burger King, Larry and Sergey, as soon as Andy drove off to celebrate. As Larry Page said, we thought we should get something that tasted really good, although it was really unhealthy, and it was cheap, and it just seemed the right combination of the way to celebrate our new funding. Silicon Valley had a lot of things, as I said. It had venture capital, it had engineers, it had universities, it had professors who not only taught, but encouraged you to form companies. It also had, a lot of hippies and people who defied authority and free speech movement could all work at places like Atari and then be engineers at Google. But it also had something that you didn't find much on the East Coast, which was garages, 2-car garages, just like Steve Jobs' family had a garage, even though it was a small house, and that's where Apple was started. Likewise, Sergey and Larry have a friend named Susan Wojcicki. And in September 1998, a month after they met with Andy Bechtolsheim, they incorporated the company, they cashed his check, and they went to Susan's garage and rented from her a garage where they could start doing what they ended up dubbing on a big whiteboard in the garage, Google Worldwide Headquarters. There they are in the garage. There's Susan. By the way, Susan, she now runs YouTube. No good deed goes, well, actually, it's a good deed and it paid off. So, is this really a triumph of what we called human-computer symbiosis? You remember the original directories we talked about were a mixture of human hands and computers. And so it seems like that's a real combination of machines and humans. And perhaps Google looked like, if you do its search engine, that it's just automating the whole thing with an algorithm and spiders. Were they really removing human hands from the product? In fact, no. In fact, what made Google so great was that it was the ultimate melding of machine intelligence and human intelligence. Every day, people got up and they created web pages. And if they wanted to write about Bill Clinton, they'd put a link and they'd link to the White House website. If they wanted to write about hot dogs, they'd do a link and it would go to some wonderful lucky dog vendor in the French Quarter or whatever it may be. Every day there were hundreds of thousands, millions of human judgments being made each hour by what links they were putting on their website. And what Google did was harvest human intuition, harvest this work of the human mind and connect that work of the human mind with an algorithm and a directory and servers and an ability to meld human minds, human creativity with machine processing power. In other words, it was what Ada Lovelace looked for, what Doug Engelbart looked for, what JCR Licklider looked for, what Steve Jobs looked for, which is that highest form of human-computer symbiosis. And that reaches its peak with the World Wide Web, the creation of the internet, and then the creation of Google, so that anyone, anywhere, can link to anything, everywhere, and find it. You can connect to minds around the world by the processing power of humans, and you have gotten a great interface for human-computer interaction. Thanks.